Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am thankful for the opportunity this evening to speak on C-39. At the outset, I believe it's important, first of all, that my constituents know that this bill is not a complicated one, does not propose anything new to Canada's euthanasia laws, nor does it propose to appeal laws that are currently in place. This is a simple bill that delays the expansion of medical assistance in dying to those living with mental illness by 12 months, 1 year. On those grounds, Conservatives support its swift passage, but only as a temporary solution. But this bill is what happens when a government moves too fast, too aggressively, and fails to take into account the pleas of experts and everyday Canadians living with mental illness and their family members that are living with them. These Canadians include our family members, our friends, our neighbours, and our co-workers. They live with mental illness that to them should not be a death sentence. They see the provision of MAID for their illness as yet another step along the road to devaluing life in this country. They know it's not going to accomplish anything to end stigma around mental illness, and they know that it puts vulnerable Canadians from all walks of life with illness seen and unseen at risk. And that's why this bill is little comfort to me and to Canadians at large. The extension of assisted death to mental illness must not just be delayed, it must be scrapped completely. Assisted death has been a highly emotional issue since this place first considered its legalization in 2016. It was the first bill that I debated in this House. Debate's been passionate due to our personal experiences, personal beliefs and convictions on what constitutes dignity in end-of-life decisions. However, today's debate takes on even a greater heaviness in that respect. Statistics indicate that 1 in 2 Canadians by age 40 have or have had a mental illness. The chances are even greater for young people, and among those who have answered surveys on the topic, respondents report that they would be 3 times less likely to disclose a mental illness than a physical one like cancer. The numbers are grim, but paint a realistic picture of mental health as it relates to all Canadians. It's universal. No one is immune from life's difficulties, whether in the short or the long term. That's precisely why stakeholders are asking this government to show true compassion by reconsidering an expansion of MAID to those with wounds that are largely unseen. The Canadian Mental Health Association points to socio-demographic factors beyond age, education, and income levels as driving forces behind a request for MAID. Racism, poverty, homelessness, and gender-based violence have harmful effects on mental health and symptoms of mental illness. And over these past couple of years, we can tell too, isolation, persecution for one's beliefs, hopelessness impact our mental health. The Ontario Hospital Association is clear that these complex issues must be addressed through appropriate legal safeguards coupled with societal supports before assisted death expansion is considered. On the other hand, I believe that we must consider the realities of mental health in Canada among certain groups close to my heart and why expansion must never be entertained. This summer, Canadians were shocked to learn that a Canadian Armed Forces veteran struggling with PTSD and a brain injury was repeatedly advised of MAID as a solution to his suffering by a Veterans Affairs Canada employee. The veteran had never inquired about MAID, but even after asking the VAC employee to stop pressuring him over and over again, the employee persisted. We know that veterans face a greater risk of suicide compared to the average population. It's truly frightening to know that instead of facilitating the most appropriate care available, this public servant chose to repeatedly suggest MAID as a solution to suffering. This frightens me to know and wonder how often has this type of advice led to tragic consequences. Debbie Lowther of Vets Canada said that it's like planting a seed within someone who's already struggling with their mental health or maybe even contemplating suicide. No matter how isolated the Veterans Affairs issue may be purported to be, and I don't believe it is clearly a result of this government's attempts to muddy the water on suicide. It did a lot to draw Canadians' attention to the normalization of assisted death in this country and just how rapidly it's becoming a fix-all solution, not just for end-of-life issues, Speaker, but for treatable illnesses among vulnerable people. Speaker, when accessing an assisted death takes less time than accessing disability benefits for our veterans, we are completely failing them. Sadly, veterans aren't alone in this respect. Some Ontarians, for example, face multi-year wait times for special mental health care. That's years of living with mental health issues when they could be receiving treatment. And why aren't they? We need to ask ourselves that question. Disability advocates have been crystal clear with this government for years that Canadians do not have access to all the supports that they need and deserve and are even available. In a piece in the Hill Times this past week, Spencer Van Volten of Disability BC is correct when he states, and I'm quoting him, "Too much time is spent considering who should die rather than how to help people live." He goes on to note all-time highs in wait times, nearly 30 weeks for those seeking mental health treatment. To paraphrase one disability rights advocate, those living with treatable illnesses likely would not put MAID anywhere near the top of their list if they had unimpeded access to support and treatment. Indigenous Canadians also face an increased risk of preventable harm as MAID becomes more accessible. Tyler White, CEO of Siksika Health Services, noted that Indigenous elders, and I'm quoting him here, Indigenous elders work hard to tell young people that suicide should not be an option, and the Medical Assistance in Dying Bill, C7 in this case, says the opposite, end quote. Many Indigenous Canadians can speak to negative experiences with the healthcare system, including procedures that were done against their will. It's my belief that an assisted death regime with ever-expanding boundaries and ever-diminishing safeguards will not help to heal mistrust. It will only worsen it for our Indigenous people, our veterans, and those with disabilities. Speaker, it comes down to this simple fact. The same majority of Canadians who desire empowerment in their end-of-life decisions want Parliament to carefully weigh the risks of MAID for those living with mental health issues, such as depression. 69% fear that depressed individuals could see MAID as a means to escape dealing with the underlying causes of their conditions, which can, the experts say, Madam Speaker, over time deal with those conditions. The slippery slope does exist, and it exists nowhere, anywhere near to the effect that it is happening in Canada and spinning out of control. We got to apply the brakes here, ma'am. We're not only listening to those who will personally affected by these laws, but we also need to take lessons. I know this government says we take no lessons. Well, don't take them from us then. Take them from jurisdictions with a long-standing MAID regime for mental illness. In Belgium and Netherlands, MAID laws once limited to mentally competent, terminally ill adults now includes adults and children with mental deficiencies, severely disabled individuals, and those with treatable psychiatric conditions such as anorexia and depression. Between 2012 and 17, the Netherlands alone saw a 600% increase in euthanasia, which was sought to address psychiatric conditions that the experts say cannot be determined to be irremediable. So this government has made a choice. I want to say it again, this government has made a choice. This minister has claimed this is only a pause. It cannot claim as a government that it stands as a champion for mental health treatment while simultaneously cheapening the value of that treatment and indeed human life itself. It can't claim that it's standing a champion for mental health treatment while also cheapening the value of treatment and indeed human life itself. The minister claims that MAID expansion can be done safely. But experts have been clear that expanding eligibility of medical assistance in dying to Canadians living with mental health illnesses cannot be done safely. It's impossible to determine irremediability in individual cases of mental illness. This expansion will only blur the lines further between suicide assistance and suicide prevention. Canadians cannot trust this Liberal and NDP government to protect the lives of our most vulnerable, including those who are simply asking for a hand in the seasons of need. Every action that they have used for MAID since 2015 has achieved the opposite. So, ma'am, let's not further stigmatize those with mental illness by placing euthanasia ahead of other solutions. We need to reject a culture of demand, death on demand, and instead, let's make Canada a champion for suicide prevention at all stages of life.
Questions and comments. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I think that it's somewhat offensive to try to even give an impression that we want death on demand, or any member of the House of Commons would want death on demand. That's really quite an extreme statement. As a government, we've invested an immense amount of resources towards mental health, far greater than previous governments before us. And I did want to address the one issue, and I guess this would be the form of the question. When Veterans Affairs, civil servant, an agent of Veterans Affairs, had made that recommendation, I think it greatly offended every member of the House of Commons. And my understanding is that that person is no longer talking to veterans. And I'm wondering if the member would provide that clarification. Would she not agree that whether it's a veterans agent or individuals that don't have the authority to even deal with the issue of MAID should not be recommending in any circumstances that MAID be an option?
For Yorkton Melville.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do thank the member for the question. The truth of the matter is that this issue exposed something that is happening in our society and is happening without oversight. I know when the previous Minister of Justice in this House indicated that the first bill on assisted suicide, or MAID, had to be studied extensively before we moved forward with any other considerations. And this government just flew right by that and immediately brought in another piece of legislation that, again, has opened it up to, I'm sorry, I don't know how much closer to death on demand it can get when a veteran is told by someone who, yes, was illegal in doing what they did, by even suggesting it because it was out of their purview, to open it up to that point, to say to someone, you know what, with all of your issues, this would be a better alternative to your life.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My colleague said something, a quote that I think is haunting, profound, and accurate. It's the quote where she quoted someone who said, "We spend too much time helping people to die and not enough time helping people to live." And, you know, for the government House Leader to try to diminish what happened with Veterans Affairs, I find that disgusting. I was wondering if my colleague would like to take a little bit more time talking about some of the really good things that she mentioned that the Canadian government should be doing to help people to live, as opposed to this measure that's in front of us that should never have been contemplated.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
I thank my colleague for that question. There is so much that is being left on the table, in the back room, I don't know where, that is not being done. And it raises doubts, I can tell you, in veterans' minds as to the true intent of this government in truly meeting their needs. I am serious. When you have a backlog that continues to grow and grow and grow, while the minister is talking about the billions of dollars we're throwing at this, same with mental health, and yet things are not improving. They are getting worse. We have a responsibility in this House to do everything we can to make life valuable. Under this government, we should have top-notch palliative care across this entire nation. We should be taking care of our veterans from the moment they enlist till the moment that they are successful in a civilian life when they're done serving. There are so many things that could be done by this government. Thank you, Madam.
For a brief question, the Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding the many leading psychiatrists who have made it very clear that this expansion cannot be implemented safely, notwithstanding the Association of Chairs of Psychiatry calling on this government to stop this expansion, the Minister of Justice, even though he has moved this bill forward, has actually said that the government could have gone ahead with this anyhow, notwithstanding that irremediability and suicidality and other legal and clinical issues remain unresolved. Doesn't this speak to the degree to which this minister is blinded by ideology.
I have to, the honourable member for Yorkton Melville, that wasn't quite a short question, but if the honourable member can give me a short answer, that'd be great.
I'll do my best. The truth of the matter is that the minister has shown his hand. He has no intention of not making this law come into effect. And that is where Canadians have drawn the line. The reason that they have stalled is because they realize that they are not reflecting the values and the desires of the majority of Canadians. And for once, I would love to see them function as a government on behalf of Canadians.